I think when we sew items that have set-in sleeves, we want them to fit comfortably. We want to have enough space. We want to be able to do basic movements, but sometimes the patterns just don't fit that way. And you might need to make your sleeve piece a little wider or a little narrower. Hi sewing friends, I'm Karina from liftingpinsandneedles.com. Welcome to this channel that is all about sewing, limitless sewing, and today is about fitting the sleeve properly, just to have the nice amount of ease that you want and the comfort that you need when you wear items that have a set-in sleeve. So what this video is not about today is a dolman sleeve or a raglan sleeve. I will consider making separate videos about those. And this episode slides right into my ongoing fitting series for the upper half. I have quite a few videos already. The playlist is linked down below. You'll find all the topics you need, mainly focused on fitting woven garments, and today is about the sleeve. What you will see today, we work with both wovens and knit sleeves because the way that you adjust them is exactly the same. A lot of patterns do have the bicep measurement in the body measurements chart and the finish measurements chart, and if you do basic subtraction there, you can figure out the amount of ease drafted into the pattern for that particular style. It's always good to know. Now, some patterns don't have any information about the sleeve at all. They'll give you the bust, the waist, the hips, whatnot, nothing about the sleeve. You might want to also measure the sleeve, do some quick flat pattern measurements to see what you're working with. So let's just quickly see how to do that in a few seconds. I've just drawn a partial sleeve so you can see how to measure this if the pattern doesn't give you that information. All you need to do is draw in your seam allowance, whatever they may be for your pattern. In this case, I have 3/8. And just where these seams intersect right here underneath, this is where you measure. I would measure with my tape measure that I'm using to measure my body, so we have a sort of same reference. So measure from the seam line to the seam line across. This sleeve here measures 39 centimeters. 39 divided by 2.54 equals 15.3 inches. And then take your body measurement, compare it to the sleeve measurement, and see how much ease you have or you don't have. That's how you sort of figure out how much you need to add to the sleeve or make it narrower if that is the case for you. Take any sleeve and do the same thing, jot it down, and you will know what that sleeve measures, and then you can compare that to your body. Now that we know how to measure our sleeve, let's see quickly how to measure our arms. I just want to find the largest part of my arm. So in my case here, I have 35 centimeters. Try to make it as big as it can go. If I can just put my arms down, it goes up to 35.5. If you have a lot of muscles, maybe you want to flex and see how large your arm becomes. You just want the largest it can be, and that is going to be your bicep measurement. It can be a little tricky to manipulate the tape measure sometimes. I can do it myself, I'm used to doing it, but if you have problems, just get someone close to you to give you a hand and just measure at the fullest part of your arm. If you have muscles, if you lift weights, just flex so that you get the biggest measurement you can ever get, because that's the one that's going to work, so you can get a comfortable sleeve. Now remember, when you lose or you gain weight, your bicep circumference might change as well. Just make sure you're constantly measuring this, not just the basic measurements of the bust, the waist, and the hips. If you struggle with fitting your bicep correctly, make sure you're measuring that continuously so you know what you're at when you're going to sew your determined project. So how much ease do you want in a sleeve? That just depends on the style and what your personal preference is. So if you're looking at a nicely fitted top with a stretchy fabric, you can get away with 0 ease. I think that's the bare minimum I would be comfortable with for the sleeve to actually just measure the same as your arm. That wouldn't feel constricting or tight or anything like that, but I think if you're working with negative ease on a sleeve, it can get uncomfortable. So for a knit sleeve, I would say 0 the minimum. I think 1 or 2 inches would be comfortable, and depending on the style, if it's a hoodie or a sweater, then you'll go into the realms of a lot of positive ease, and that's absolutely fine because that's the style of the garment. With a woven, if you have a fitted bodice that has a lot of darts and you have a fitted waist, you're probably also going to have a fitted sleeve to match the design. In that case, I'd say the minimum ease I'd want to feel comfortable is in at least 1.5 to 2 inches at the bare minimum. That means that I'll be able to move my arm inside the garment. That's the minimum ease I would want anywhere. Bust, waist, and hips. I wouldn't want less positive ease than that, and I would match that to the sleeve. With this type of design, you have to be reasonable and just be aware that it's not the type of garment you're going to be doing a lot of activities with. Don't expect to be able to raise your arms, like go to the supermarket in your tight dress and get the things on the top shelf comfortably. You're probably not going to be able to extend your arms fully to be able to drive really comfortably. Like if you want to pick up your kids, that sort of thing. That is not the garment that you should expect to be doing those activities with. So don't expect your sleeve in that case to fit that way that will allow you to do all this type of motion, because it's just not the style for it. Same as a fitted blazer, you know, you wear that, you'll probably be walking around or elegant with your arms down. You'll probably raise your arms a little bit, but don't expect to be doing all of this situation with a really nicely fitted woven garment with a fitted setting sleeve. It's just not the way it works. Now also with these fitted bodices and fitted blazers, it's not just the sleeve that's also fitted and doesn't have a lot of ease, it's also that the back is fitted. So because the back is fitted, if you want to do this type of movement, that's going to stretch the back area, and that's also going to contribute in you not being able to do all the movements that you want. So there's quite a few things to consider. So don't expect to have full mobility with those types of garments. You know, you should be able to move your arm inside your sleeve, but keep it down, raise it a little, but that's about it really. So for jackets and blazers, coats that will have a layer underneath, I think you should have a lot more positive ease than the 2 inches I mentioned for the fitted dress. I'd be looking at 5 or 6 inches maybe, because you're going to wear something underneath. And when you're doing a garment like this, you're doing a test garment, put that layer underneath your test garment to see if you're comfortable with the sleeve there. What I'm wearing right now from Pattern Emporium is a shirt dress, and it's got a really comfortable sleeve. The shoulder fits the shoulder, it's not a drop sleeve, and I do have enough ease to move around. They're going to look nice and neat. The shoulder's going to be at the shoulder. You have a nice sitting sleeve, but then you also have enough space to move around. Depends on what you want. Those are things that you need to think about also when you're choosing a pattern that has a sleeve. What do you want to do with that on while you live your life? The activities that you're going to be doing every day, is that going to work? So today we're going to be looking at scenarios where we have a basic setting sleeve. The example I'm going to show you is a basic knit sleeve. Now I had to simulate this scenario because I usually don't have problems fitting my sleeve, but because this is a sewing channel, I want to provide the content for you. This is not a problem I run into frequently. So I had to create a smaller sleeve so you can see what happens when you have a fitted knit sleeve, and what things you can see there that you're not expecting and you might misinterpret as another fitting issue. So let's just see. I have created a sleeve that's tighter so you can see what could happen. This is in the context of a knit. This sleeve is 1 inch narrower than what it should be. It feels super tight. It feels really skin tight. I've actually measured it here and I have 1 inch of negative ease around my bicep, which is uncomfortable. 0 is the minimum. 1 inch would be nice. So one thing that could happen if it's tight here is that the sleeve will try to find the narrower part of your arm, which is where it starts going down towards your elbow. So this might start pulling down to find the narrower space to live. What it does is it pulls the shoulder seam down. So you might find it really tight around this area on the neckline, and you might think, if you're not thinking about your sleeves, oh wow, this shoulder is just dropping from my joint because this is where my shoulder is. I need to do a narrow shoulder adjustment. But it actually could be the sleeve and not the shoulder. So this should fit normal at the shoulder like this, but because the sleeve is tight, it might start riding down, trying to find a smaller part of your arm down further and just sliding down and pulling all of this down, which would make it really tight across this area. In contrast, let's see this sleeve. This one is the original sleeve of the pattern, and you can see that I can move my arm. It's quite comfortable. I don't feel it tight around my arm, and this is not pulling my shoulder seam down. It's normal, it's fine, it's not going anywhere. Whatever I do, it's not going down, and it feels comfortable. In comparison to this one, where the shoulder seam is drooping down, it's just pulling down and you can feel it. It's just really, really uncomfortable. So this is in the context of a knit. In a woven, it might be the same if the sleeve is super tight. One thing with a tight sleeve on a woven is that you won't be able to move. It'll just be really uncomfortable. I filmed that clip months and months ago while I was sewing a dress. So I've already finished that dress. You've already seen it on the channel. But while I was sewing it, I created all of this scenario and I filmed all of this footage for you. You can see that the extra fitted knit sleeve is going to be uncomfortable. It's going to push your shoulder down. It's going to pull across the upper chest, maybe the upper back. It's just not comfortable, but you will still be able to move because that's just how knit fabrics work, right? You'll still be able to move. Although uncomfortably, you will still be able to do that, which is totally different with the fitted woven sleeve. it will just feel really uncomfortable. It's actually really bad for your circulation. You just won't be able to move with a fitted woven. So let's see how to do the typical full bicep adjustment. And this is a bicep adjustment that will adjust up to 1 inch. Here I have a generic long sleeve. What you want to do is draw in your seam allowances. In this case, I've drawn in 3/8. So right here, I've done that partially, and then I've done it all around the sleeve cap as well with a dotted line coming down there. There was a grain line mark. I just extended it all the way down to the hem. I also drew in my hem allowance right there. Where these seam allowances intersect, that's where I drew all the way across right there. That is the widest part of the sleeve. And in this area where we have all those intersecting seams, that is where the sleeve is going to become wider right there. So what we want to do is we want to have a lot of hinge points here. All the cuts we're going to do to the sleeve are going to be inside, internal. So I'm just going to poke a hole through here, cut all the way up to the seam line on the top of the sleeve cap. Then I'm going to cut these horizontal lines up to the seam line. And then what we want to do so that it helps the paper stay flat is cut from the edge of a paper up to the dot, up to the hinge point, the seam line. So it's right up to there. You need to leave a little bit of paper there. Same as up here and down here, and also the hem allowance at the bottom. So now we have this movable piece that we can manipulate. It helps to do it with a cutting mat underneath. With this method, the maximum you can add to the sleeve is 1 inch. The more you add, the flatter the sleeve cap is going to become. It's still going to keep the same length of the seam line there. It'll fit your sleeve, but it will affect comfort and mobility the flatter the seam goes. This is why we want to make the sleeve wider. So let's just do it by 1 inch. So there you can see at this part that we have 1 inch extra. So you can see that by making this area wider by 1 inch, this overlapped right there. And that's how you can keep the sleeve flat. You can see how this looks flatter than the original curve. This is an original curve right here. See how this sleeve became wider here, but it's still keeping the same length of the seam line. It's just that we don't see this nice higher curve. It's lower down there. So that's what happens when you make the sleeve wider. It just becomes flatter on the top. And that's why this is the maximum amount you can add with this method without affecting it too much, without affecting the comfort. So if you were just adding 1/2 inch, for example, this change would be minimal. So don't make this wider by 1.5 inches and just leave it. If you do want to make this wider than 1 inch, you do need to do something else that we'll see in a sec. Let's see what happens at the hem. You can see I have a hinge point there, and you can see the line underneath on the cutting mat right there and right there, and you can see how it became slightly shorter in the center of the sleeve. So you do want to fix that. If the change is huge, I would fix that, because at the center you have 1/4 inch shorter. You don't want that. So you would just add paper there and then just straighten out the hem and add that back. I would keep it like this if your wrist or your forearm wasn't also larger in comparison to your body. If you did need the extra space down your arm completely from the forearm up to the wrist, then I wouldn't do this business here. I would actually just widen it 1 inch the whole way down, or maybe widen it less down here, maybe keep it 1/2 inch here. In that case, I wouldn't have the hinge point. I would just open this up and manipulate it a little bit right there. Don't worry about if you have a cuff detail on a blouse. You can always adjust the amount of overlap you have in the pleats, or if it's gathered into a cuff, doesn't matter. You can just make the sleeve wider to fit your arm. Now, when you do this adjustment on a short sleeve, it doesn't make sense to me to keep the hem as per the original, because depends on where the short sleeve ends. You still have a full part of the arm right there. So let's see what the difference could be with a short sleeve that you can think about. This is another pattern piece for a short sleeve, and with a short sleeve, I wouldn't just cut in here and keep the width here at the bottom the same. That doesn't make sense to me. I would just add the width to the whole piece. Say you just want to add 1/2 inch. This would overlap a little right there while you keep your sleeve flat, and then you would just keep that distance all the way down parallel. And I wouldn't try to bring this back into the hem, because you still have a larger part of your arm around the short sleeve area. Now, what happens if you need to adjust more than 1 inch? What happens if you need to adjust 1.5 inches or 2 inches? Which is the maximum I would do. If you need more than that, maybe consider going up a size, then we go into another different scenario. But what I'm going to show you next is just a few extra steps that you need to do that will involve modifying the sleeve cap height and also the armhole of the garment you're working with to get a better fit with the larger adjusted sleeve. Now, let me show you what happens if you want to make this 1.5 inches wider, for example. So in this area, let's open up to 1.5. The overlap here is going to be very big. The change at the bottom of the hem is going to be very big as well. And in this case, the sleeve cap became very flat. If you're going to do this method before you start, you need to trace out on paper your original sleeve cap height. So I've got it traced right there. Mark the notches. I've got the lines to mark the original width of the sleeve also. And we're going to slide this behind this to get back our sleeve height so that we get that mobility back. I've put the original curve at the back, matching up the notches. You can see that the sleeve cap height was lowered by about 1.25 inches with doing this large bicep adjustment. So you can't just sew in this flat sleeve onto your armhole. It's just not going to be comfortable. So this is how we get back the sleeve height right here. We're going to use the original curve that we had. Over here we see that the original sleeve stopped there. I can see it. Our sleeve has all this extra on the side. So this means that we need to manipulate the armhole. Basically means that we need to extend the armhole by about 5/8 of an inch. I've copied the armhole of the pattern that I'm using, which is not important. This is the back and you would do the same with the front. Here you can see the seam line right here. Basically what you need to do is add 5/8 of an inch to the side. And you can do this in two ways. You can do it by dropping it a little and extending it. I think that creates the less amount of distortion. I'm measuring the whole pattern, including seam allowance. So I get 27.5 centimeters. I want to get to 29. So the way that this is going to distort less is if I move this down and out here, and that would be there. So I'm moving it down on the green line, as you can see, and out. When I moved it out, it's only 3/8 here, but because I moved it down as well, I get the total length that I need. And then here, you will just need to taper back into the side seam, taper back in smoothly. Then over here, you will just need to recalculate and draw this again, your cutting line, because you've dropped that armhole. All I would do here is just cut around this, and I would have the original height here. This is going to match my new armhole because I've lengthened the armhole in essence. And here over at the bottom, because the adjustment is quite big, the distortion on the hem is quite notorious as well. So this is something you would really need to come in there and fix. And that would be your new sleeve piece that's added 1.5 inches. So I hope that was helpful. Now, another type of sleeve I wanted to mention in this episode is a two-piece sleeve that you might find on blazers and coats. And a couple of months ago, I made the Dorothy blazer by Style Arc, and I encountered myself in that situation where I felt the sleeve was too fitted. So I'm going to show you the original fitting clip I filmed myself wearing my test garment and how I felt that sleeve was and how it was pulling, so you can see. Find the sleeve from here to there is a little narrow for me, so I find it a little bit fitted on this area. So I'm going to be adding maybe 1/2 inch here and doing a full bicep adjustment, and I'll be doing that on the upper sleeve piece right there. Doing a full bicep adjustment on a two-piece sleeve is basically just done on the upper sleeve piece, so not on the undersleeve piece. It's the same type of idea of the other full bicep adjustment. It's just a little bit different. So let's see how to quickly do that. This is a two-piece sleeve, and when you're doing a full bicep adjustment on a single piece sleeve, then you involve the whole thing. In this case, it's a little different. I don't want to involve the undersleeve. I just need the extra volume right here on the upper sleeve, which is the one that goes on the top of my arm. I'm going to put it aside and not touch it and only do the adjustment on this sleeve. So we can see a grain line mark here on the pattern. I'm just going to draw that and extend it. As usual, we have the seam lines marked here on the pattern. I'm going to do a dot because we're going to pivot right there, and we're going to take the line all the way down to the hem line right here. If I bring this back, you can see that this is our bicep line. So that is where I want to do my line here to do the full bicep adjustment, but just on this one. I've aligned the grain line of the sleeve against the lines of my cutting mat so that everything's nice and straight, because I want to do a line that's perpendicular to the grain line. So I'm going to match that dot right here on a line, which is right there. And then I'm going to follow the line right here. On this edge, I'm also going to have a pivot point. All the chain's going to be internally within the sleeve, so this is not going to change its length, neither is that, and that's how I'm going to be able to sew on the other piece of the sleeve without affecting anything, and I'm just going to have that little bit of ease that I want. So I'm going to cut from the edge up to that dot here and on this other side. Now from the bottom, we need to start cutting from the hem. I'm just going to poke the paper with my scissors and start cutting. And I'm cutting right up to there. We're going to have a little hinge point right here, and on these horizontal lines we're going to cut as well. Basically slice the sleeve from within. Now it's in this area where the bicep is, where I need to add the 1/2 inch extra. So again, I've got a piece of paper that has the 1/2 inch already marked, and I'm just going to slide this underneath. So it is a little fiddly. I have that paper with the 1/2 inch marked, and that's where I want that fullness to be, right here where I have these horizontal lines. Now in order to open it in this area, we're going to have a little bit of overlap here. I just want to fix this in place there. You can see these overlapped right there, but only a little bit. This type of adjustment allows you to add maximum 1 inch, or else it really deforms this area. So as you go up, you're going to have less, and then when you get down to the hem, you're going to have basically the original width right there at the hem. I'm going to add paper behind all of this area. Okay, so here we have the upper sleeve with the bicep adjustment done. It was done on the grain line up to there. Remember, leaving pivot points so all of these can pivot and you can end up with a flat pattern piece. That's the whole idea. Now when you overlap a little bit here, it wasn't that much. In this case, I don't think the hem is too compromised. When you overlap more, right there, because you added more, it can sort of dip up right there at the bottom, so then you have to adjust and straighten that out. When I drew the line, there is a difference there of about 1/8 of an inch, which is pretty negligible, but if it was more, then I would fix it properly and add more paper here and just fix that hem allowance. But that's it, really easy. It didn't really change any part of the outside of the sleeve, so everything's going to fit the same. The notches weren't modified along the top of the sleeve cap. It'll fit the armhole just the same, no changes. And then when you sew this in, it'll be exactly the same. It's just that you've added the ease on this area. After adjusting my sleeve pattern, I did cut new pattern pieces and sewed a brand new sleeve onto my test garment just to confirm that I had added enough. You see that my adjustment was minimal. I didn't add that much, but I think it did make a difference. Keeping the style that this is a fitted blazer, you know, I'm not intending to do the activities I was mentioning before, but I did want to at least be able to rotate my shoulder and my arm inside the sleeve comfortably. So let's see how the new test garment fits. I added 1/2 inch to the upper sleeve piece, and I'm really happy now. I can move my arm inside. It's still a slim fitting sleeve, but I don't have that pulling there that I had with the other piece, so I'm glad I did that. Some other ideas I want to mention have got to do with the style of sleeve that you are working with. So you might have a design that has a nice gathered sleeve right here, nicely gathered at the sleeve cap. It's generally a sleeve that has a little bit more ease all around the arm. It might gather into a cuff, that type of sleeve. Don't think that you don't need to do a bicep adjustment on that type of sleeve if you know that this is an adjustment you need a lot, because it just might not look the way that the design is intended. You might be able to get your arm into a sleeve like that, but you're not going to get nice gathers flowing down the sleeve. You might get a puff sort of situation going on there and a fitted sort of look at the arm, and it will just look strange. So don't assume that you don't need to do the adjustment with that style. I would still do it. I would still add the extra ease so that you end up with a comfortable sleeve that looks like the design intended to look. Don't worry if there's extra gathers there. Just gather a little more into the original armhole and you'll be fine. Okay, and I'm not going to forget about you who have narrow arms in relation to your bust and your body. It is another possibility for some people that they have to choose a size for their bust to fit, you know, their shoulders, everything, but they always end up with a really loose sleeve. So what happens if you need to do a narrow bicep adjustment? Easy, you do the exact same cut lines, same hinge points and everything, but instead of spreading the sleeve open, you overlap, and that ends up creating another scenario. This is actually the adjustment I did to my sleeve to simulate that tight sleeve that you saw on my previous fitting clip. So when I was doing that, I thought I might as well film it because I'm doing it. So why not film this? I know it might be not as common as having to adjust the sleeve to be wider, but I know some people would like to make it narrower as well. So let's quickly see how to do a narrow bicep adjustment. I'm gonna do the inverse situation here. What happens if you have very narrow arms in relation to your bust? So let's make a narrow bicep adjustment. You basically do the same cut lines that you did for the full bicep adjustment. It's all the same. Instead of braiding, we're gonna overlap. So let's say we want to just make this 5/8 of an inch narrower. So from the edge of the paper, I'm just gonna draw a line here and there at the same place, 5/8 of an inch. Now what we're going to do is overlap these. We have our hinge points everywhere, so just bring this edge of the paper to match that little line that we marked, and the same for this other piece. You're going to see that it's different to what happens with the full bicep adjustment where the papers overlap. In this case they spread out, so you can end up with a little gap right there. Makes the sleeve a little longer, it makes the sleeve cap a little higher. but you've still kept the stitching line the same length, front and back. It's going to fit the original armhole just the same. It's just that your sleeve became slightly longer right there. For a short sleeve, I would just keep it the same all the way down, but let's see on the long one. So the same, let's draw how much you want to make it narrower from, 5/8, right there, overlap. So when we overlapped, it opened up a gap in the center here. If we align each of these edges onto a line, we're going to see that at the center of the sleeve, it dips down. And that is something that you just need to even out. So if you look at the hem, put the edge on a line here at the center of the sleeve, you might have a dip, might be a little longer there, which is something you might want to fix, but otherwise it's as easy as that. So you see that the full bicep and the narrow bicep adjustment are just the opposite scenarios. You know, with the full bicep adjustment, you end up with a flatter sleeve cap. With the narrow adjustment, you end up with a higher cap. Whatever adjustment is always going to change that original sleeve cap height. So just make sure these adjustments are slight. Keep them an inch or less so that it doesn't really change it that much. You always keep the original seam line that you can fit your original sleeve if you're making these adjustments within an inch. I hope this was helpful. This was just a very practical one, get to the point type of video, and that's all from me. I'll see you again on this channel with more fun sewing content. Make sure you're subscribed. Bye.